sharply dressed man throws cash on the table, his face filled with disgust. A tired, single mother freezes, her child quietly holding her hand. The room goes silent. Then, she slowly smiles. Not hurt, not broken, but knowing something he doesn't. People judge too quickly. One look, one assumption, one cruel sentence, and suddenly, someone's entire life is reduced to nothing. But sometimes, the person you look down on is the one who can change your life forever. Welcome to Prime Tale. If you love powerful, emotional stories with unexpected twists that keep you hooked till the very end, make sure you subscribe to Prime Tale. Stay with this one because this story will completely change the way you see people. The restaurant wasn't fancy, but it was warm. The kind of place where people came not just for food, but to feel seen. And behind the counter stood Clara, a single mother, tired eyes, but a strong heart. Her uniform was slightly worn, her hair tied back in a simple knot. Nothing about her stood out unless you looked closely, because if you did, you'd see the quiet strength in her movements. The way she never complained. The way she smiled, even when life clearly hadn't smiled back at her. Her son, Leo, sat quietly in the corner booth doing his homework. He came here every evening after school. It wasn't ideal, but it was all she had, and she made it work. Until the door swung open, and everything changed. A man walked in, confident, expensive suit, the kind of presence that demanded attention without asking for it. His name was Victor Hale, and he wasn't used to being told no. He scanned the room with a subtle look of disapproval, like everything around him was beneath his standards. Then he sat. Clara approached with her usual calm smile. "Good evening, sir. What can I get for you?" Victor didn't even look at her at first. "Water," he said coldly. No eye contact, no acknowledgement. She nodded and walked away. Minutes later, she returned with his order. But as she gently placed the glass down, a drop of water spilled onto the table. It was small, barely noticeable, but to Victor, it was unacceptable. He leaned back, staring at the tiny spill like it had ruined his entire day. "Unbelievable," he muttered. Clara quickly reached for a napkin. "I'm so sorry, sir." But he cut her off. "No, don't apologize. Just do your job properly." The tone, sharp, dismissive. The entire restaurant felt it. Clara paused for a second, just a second, then continued wiping the table quietly. But Victor wasn't done. "People like you," he said, finally looking at her. "This is why you stay exactly where you are." Silence. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Leo looked up from his homework. His small fingers tightened around his pencil. Clara froze. Not because she hadn't heard worse, but because her son had. And that changed everything. She slowly stood upright. Their eyes met. For the first time, Victor actually saw her. Not as a worker, not as background noise, but as a person. And something about her calmness irritated him even more. "You should be grateful," he continued, leaning forward. "At least you have a job. Some people aren't even that lucky." A few customers shifted in their seats. This had gone too far, but no one spoke. Clara glanced at Leo, then back at Victor, and something shifted. Not anger, not sadness, something else, something deeper. She smiled, softly, and said, "You're right." Victor blinked, caught off guard. "I am grateful." Her voice was steady, too steady, but not for the reason you think. Victor frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" Clara didn't answer. Instead, she stepped back, calm, composed, like she knew something he didn't. And that unsettled him more than any argument could have. Because for the first time that night, he wasn't in control. Leo watched his mother carefully, and slowly, he smiled too. Victor noticed, and something about that quiet confidence started to bother him. A lot. He scoffed, throwing some cash onto the table. "Keep the change," he said, standing up. But as he turned to leave, Clara spoke again. "Sir." He stopped, just slightly, not fully turning around. "Yes." Her voice was calm, almost gentle. "You shouldn't judge people so quickly." Victor smirked. "And why is that?" A pause, just long enough. Then, "Because you never really know who they are." Victor chuckled, dismissive, arrogant, and walked out. But as the door closed behind him, something about her words, stayed with him. And for reasons he couldn't explain. It didn't feel like a warning. It felt like a promise. Victor Hale didn't think about her again. At least, that's what he told himself. Because men like Victor didn't dwell on small moments. They moved forward. They dominated. They forgot. But that night, sleep didn't come easy. Her words replayed in his mind. You never really know who they are. It was annoying, unnecessary, and yet, it lingered. The next morning, Victor stood in front of the glass walls of his office, overlooking the city. Everything below him moved fast. Cars, people, deals, money. This was his world. Control, precision, power. And today mattered. A major acquisition. One that could elevate his company to an entirely new level. Or destroy years of work if it failed. His assistant walked in quickly. Sir, the investors are ready. The meeting starts in 20 minutes. Victor nodded, adjusting his cufflinks. Good. And the representative from the holding group. She hesitated. A last-minute change. Victor's eyes narrowed. I don't like changes. I understand, sir. But they insisted. He exhaled sharply. Fine. Who is it? They didn't say. That bothered him. A lot. In Victor's world, information was everything. And right now, he had none. The boardroom was silent. Tense. 10 investors sat around the long, polished table. Powerful people. The kind who didn't waste time. Victor walked in confidently, every step calculated, every movement controlled. This was his stage, and he owned it. Good morning, he said, taking his seat at the head of the table. A few nods. No smiles. Straight to business. I assume we're all aware of what's at stake today, Victor began. Let's proceed. But just as he opened the file in front of him, the door opened. Slowly, all eyes turned. And that's when everything shifted. A woman walked in. Calm, composed, confident, not rushed, not intimidated, just present. Victor didn't recognize her at first, because this version of her was completely different. No worn uniform, no tied-back hair, no exhaustion. Instead, she wore a tailored suit, elegant, minimal, powerful, her posture straight, her gaze steady. And beside her, 2 executives followed closely, respectfully, like she was the one in charge. Victor frowned slightly. Something felt off. Then she spoke. Apologies for the delay. That voice. Familiar. Too familiar. Victor's fingers tightened slightly on the table. No, it couldn't be. But then, she stepped fully into the light and looked directly at him. Not nervous. Not hesitant. Just calm. And that's when it hit him. Hard. Clara, the waitress. The single mother he had insulted just hours ago. The room remained unaware. But inside Victor's mind, everything collapsed at once. This didn't make sense. It couldn't. And yet, there she was, standing in front of some of the most powerful investors in the room. Like she belonged there. Like she owned the space. His space. She walked to the opposite end of the table and sat down. At the head, directly across from him, a quiet power shift. Subtle, but undeniable. Victor forced himself to speak. Let's begin, he said, masking the tension in his voice. But his mind was racing. What was she doing here? Who was she really? And most importantly, how much did she know? Clara opened her file calmly. No rush. No nerves. Then she looked up, straight at Victor. And for a brief moment, a small smile appeared on her lips. Not mocking, not emotional, just knowing. The same smile from the restaurant. And suddenly, Victor felt something unfamiliar. Not anger, not control, but uncertainty. Mr. Hale, she began, her voice steady, professional, sharp. I believe you've been expecting our organization. Victor swallowed his irritation. Yes. She nodded. Good. Then let's not waste time. The room leaned in slightly. Energy shifting. Curiosity rising. Because something about her presence demanded attention. She clicked a button. A presentation lit up on the screen. Numbers. Data. Structures. And within seconds, Victor realized something terrifying. She wasn't just prepared. She was ahead. Every projection he had planned, she had already analyzed. Every risk, already calculated. Every weakness, exposed. And she was doing it effortlessly. One investor leaned forward. Impressive, he muttered. Another nodded slowly. Victor stayed silent. But inside, pressure was building. Because for the first time in a long time, he wasn't the smartest person in the room. She was. Clara continued speaking. Clear, direct, controlled. And then she paused, looked at Victor again, and said something that changed everything. We value partnerships built on respect. A simple sentence. But the way she said it wasn't simple. It was deliberate, intentional, personal. Victor felt it, and he knew she wasn't just talking about business. The room didn't notice, but he did, and that made it worse. One of the senior investors spoke up. Ms. She turned slightly. Clara Reyes. The name landed. Clean, confident. Not the name of a struggling waitress, but the name of someone powerful, someone established, someone important. The investor nodded. Ms. Reyes, your analysis is exceptional. I assume you'll be leading this deal. She didn't hesitate. Yes. Victor's jaw tightened slightly, because that meant one thing. Everything, this entire deal, the future of his company, was now in her hands. Silence filled the room again. But this time, it wasn't tension. It was anticipation, because everyone could feel it. Something big was happening. Clara closed her file slowly, then leaned back slightly. Still calm, still composed, still in control. Then she looked directly at Victor and said, Now, let's discuss whether your company is worth our investment. Not aggressive, not emotional, just powerful. And in that moment, Victor realized something he never expected. The woman he had humiliated now held the power to either elevate him or destroy everything he had built. Victor Hale had built his reputation on one thing: control. Every deal, every room, every person. Controlled, calculated, dominated. But right now, as Clara Reyes sat across from him, that control was slipping, and he could feel it. The boardroom was silent, not empty silence, but the kind that presses against your chest. Heavy, expectant, watching, waiting. Victor adjusted slightly in his seat, masking the tension rising inside him. He had been in hundreds of meetings, faced ruthless competitors, outplayed industry giants. But this felt different, because this wasn't just business anymore. This was personal. Clara flipped a page in her file. Calm, unbothered, like she had all the time in the world. Let's begin with your financial structure, she said. Her tone was neutral, professional, but sharp enough to cut through the room. Victor nodded. Go ahead. Still confident, still composed on the surface. She tapped the screen. A new set of data appeared. Clean, organized, precise. Then, she spoke. Your last 3 quarterly reports show consistent growth. Victor leaned back slightly. Correct. But she continued smoothly. Your liquidity tells a different story. The word hung in the air. Liquidity. Simple, but dangerous. Victor's expression didn't change. But inside, something tightened, because she was right. And almost no one had noticed. One of the investors leaned forward. What do you mean? Clara didn't rush, didn't dramatize. She simply pointed. Your company is expanding aggressively, but your cash flow isn't keeping up. She glanced at Victor briefly, then back to the room, which means you're not growing. A pause. Then, you're stretching. Murmurs. Low. Uneasy. Victor spoke immediately. That's a strategic risk we're managing. His voice was firm, controlled, reclaiming ground. But Clara didn't react, didn't challenge, didn't argue, which somehow made it worse. Instead, she nodded slightly. Of course. Then added, but high-risk strategies require stable foundations. She tapped again. Another slide appeared. This time, more detailed, more specific, more dangerous. Victor leaned forward slightly now, eyes narrowing, because this wasn't public data. This was deeper, internal-level analysis, the kind of information that wasn't easy to access. How did you? He started, but stopped himself. Wrong move. Never show uncertainty. Clara looked at him, just for a second, and in that moment, he saw it again. That quiet knowing, that calm confidence, like she had already thought 10 steps ahead. One of the senior investors spoke again. Ms. Reyes, are you suggesting instability? She shook her head slightly. No. A beat. Then, I'm confirming it. Silence. Heavy. Unavoidable. The kind that changes decisions. Changes outcomes. Changes everything. Victor's hand tightened slightly under the table. This wasn't just analysis anymore. This was exposure. He leaned forward. Voice sharper now. You're making assumptions based on incomplete context. Clara met his gaze instantly. No. Simple. Direct. Unshaken. Then she leaned in slightly. Not aggressively, but with intent. And said, I'm making conclusions based on facts. That landed. Hard. The room shifted again. Not visibly, but energetically. Because power, real power, had just moved. Victor felt it. And for the first time in years, he felt something he wasn't used to. Pressure. Real pressure. Clara sat back again, calm as ever, then continued like nothing had happened. Now, let's discuss your debt exposure. Victor's heart rate picked up slightly. Not visible, but real. Because if liquidity was a crack, debt was a fracture. She brought up another set of data. And this time, even the investors reacted immediately. Eyes narrowing, postures changing, focus sharpening. One of them spoke. This is higher than we were told. Victor responded quickly. It's structured, but Clara cut in, smoothly, effortlessly, through layered subsidiaries designed to minimize visibility. The room went still. Again, that was it. That was the hit. The one that mattered. Victor stared at her now. No pretense. No dismissal. Just focus. Because now, he understood. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't luck. This wasn't surface-level analysis. She knew everything. And the question that hit him next was far worse than anything she had said. How? Because the woman from last night, the one in the worn uniform, the one he dismissed without a second thought, shouldn't have access to this level of information, shouldn't be sitting here, shouldn't be doing this. And yet, she was. Clara closed the presentation halfway. Not fully, just enough to pause the momentum. Then she looked around the room, letting the silence breathe, letting the weight settle. Then she said, before we continue, a small pause, perfectly timed. I'd like to ask one question. Everyone leaned in, even Victor. Her eyes moved slowly until they landed on him. Mr. Hale. Her voice softened slightly. Not weaker, just more focused, more precise. Do you believe your company is built on respect? A pause. Then, or perception? The question hit differently, because it wasn't about numbers anymore. It wasn't about data. It was about him. Victor didn't answer immediately. And that alone, was enough. Because in a room like this, silence is never neutral. Clara nodded slightly, as if she had already received her answer. Then she closed the file completely and said, because the difference between the two, a beat, determines whether we invest. And just like that, the entire deal hung by a thread. Victor leaned back slowly, mind racing, control slipping, pressurizing. Because now, this wasn't just business. This was judgment. And the woman he had humiliated was the one delivering it. The silence didn't break immediately. It stretched, thin, tense, uncomfortable, like the air itself was waiting for something to happen. Victor Hale had been questioned before, challenged, even attacked in negotiations. But never like this. Never by someone who, hours ago, he had completely dismissed. Clara Reyes sat still, composed, unshaken, while the weight of her question lingered in the room. Respect or perception? It wasn't just a question. It was a spotlight. And right now, it was fixed entirely on Victor. One of the investors cleared his throat. Well, I think we should proceed with the evaluation. But Clara raised her hand slightly. Not rude, not forceful, just enough. And the man stopped talking. Just like that. Victor noticed. And that's when it became undeniable. She wasn't just part of this deal. She was leading it. Fully. Clara turned her attention back to her documents, then calmly pressed a button. The screen changed again. This time, it wasn't financial data. It was something else. Something deeper. Internal communications. Emails. Transaction logs. Names. Dates. Patterns. Victor's eyes locked onto the screen. And for the first time, a crack appeared in his composure. Small, but real. Because this wasn't just analysis anymore. This was exposure at a level that shouldn't be possible. One of the board members leaned forward sharply. Where did you get this? Clara didn't even look at him. Verified sources. Simple, clean, untouchable. Victor leaned forward now, voice lower, controlled but tighter. This information is confidential. Clara nodded. Yes. A pause. Then, but not invisible. That landed like a blow. The room shifted again. The investors weren't just watching anymore. They were calculating, reassessing, repositioning, because what they were seeing changed everything. Clara highlighted a section on the screen. A series of transactions routed through 3 separate entities. She glanced briefly at Victor, then continued. All connected. Victor spoke quickly. That's standard structuring. But even as he said it, he knew this wasn't going where he wanted. Clara tilted her head slightly. Is it? And she tapped again. More data appeared. Clear. Undeniable. These transactions don't just minimize visibility, she said. They redirect accountability. Silence. Again. But this time, heavier. One investor leaned back slowly. That's concerning. Another added. This wasn't disclosed. Victor's jaw tightened. It's within legal frameworks. Clara didn't react, didn't argue, didn't push. She simply said, legal doesn't always mean ethical. That line changed the room. Completely. Because now, this wasn't about risk. It was about trust. Victor could feel it slipping, piece by piece. Control, authority, perception. And the worst part? She wasn't attacking him. She wasn't raising her voice. She wasn't even emotional. She was calm. And that made everything she said more dangerous. Victor leaned back slowly, studying her now, really studying her. Because the question that had been growing in his mind was now unavoidable. Who are you? Because this level of access, this level of precision, this level of control in a room like this didn't come from nowhere. And it definitely didn't come from someone working late shifts in a small restaurant. Clara closed that file, then opened another. But before she spoke, she paused. And for the first time since the meeting began, she shifted slightly, not physically, but emotionally. It was subtle, almost invisible, but Victor noticed, because her eyes moved, just for a second, toward the glass wall behind him, like she was remembering something. Then she spoke again. This isn't just about numbers. Her voice softened slightly, not weak, but deeper. It's about patterns. She tapped once more, and a timeline appeared. Victor's breath slowed, because now he understood. This wasn't random. This wasn't surface-level digging. This was a full investigation. Years. Mapped out. Connected. Understood. One investor leaned forward. How long has this been reviewed? Clara answered without hesitation. Long enough. That wasn't comforting. Victor felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Not fear, not panic, but something close. Because whatever this was, it had been building for a while, and he had no idea. Clara finally closed the presentation. Completely. Then she folded her hands calmly on the table and looked directly at Victor, not as a waitress, not as someone beneath him, but as his equal. No, not even that. As someone above him in this moment. And then she said something that shifted everything again. Mr. Hale, I'm curious. A slight pause. Do you treat all people the same way? Her eyes held his. Steady, unblinking. Or only the ones you think don't matter? The room went still. Completely still. Because now, this wasn't hidden anymore. This wasn't subtle. This was direct. Victor didn't respond. Not because he didn't have words, but because for the first time, he didn't have control over the outcome. Clara held his gaze for one more second, then leaned back slightly and said, because sometimes, a pause, the people you underestimate, her voice dropped just enough to pull everyone in, are the ones who already know everything about you. That was it. That was the moment. The shift from business to something much deeper. Victor felt it. The investors felt it. The entire room felt it. And suddenly, the question wasn't about the deal anymore. It was about her, who she was, what she knew, and what she was about to do next. No one spoke. No one moved. Because what had just happened was no longer just a business negotiation. It was something else, something deeper. Something personal. Victor Hale sat still. But inside, nothing was still. Every instinct he had was firing at once. Analyze. Control. Respond. But there was a problem. He didn't have enough information. And for a man like Victor, that was dangerous. His eyes stayed locked on Clara, studying her, reevaluating everything. Her posture, her tone, her timing, her control of the room. This wasn't learned overnight. This wasn't luck. This wasn't coincidence. This was power. Refined, disciplined, earned. And he had completely missed it. Clara didn't rush. She let the silence sit. Let grow. Let work. Because silence, when used correctly, forces people to think. And thinking leads to doubt. And right now, the entire room was full of it. Finally, one of the senior investors spoke. Ms. Reyes. His voice was careful now, measured, respectful. Who exactly are you representing? That question mattered, because up until now, they assumed a holding group, a firm, a corporation. But now, that assumption didn't feel solid anymore. Clara turned her head slightly, met his gaze, then answered, myself. The word landed. Heavy, confusing, unexpected. The investor frowned slightly. I'm not sure I understand. Clara nodded once. Calm, patient. That's understandable. She reached into her folder and slowly placed a document on the table. Then another, each one deliberate, each one precise. Victor's eyes dropped to the papers, and as he read, something inside him shifted. Hard. Ownership records, majority shares, control structures, all connected, all leading to one name. Clara Reyes. His grip tightened slightly, because now it made sense. Not all of it, but enough. She wasn't representing a company. She was the company. One of the investors leaned forward sharply. You own the holding group? Clara didn't react, didn't smile, didn't dramatize. She simply said, yes. Silence. Again, but this time, different. Not tension, not confusion. Shock. Because everything they thought they knew had just changed. Victor leaned back slowly, trying to process it. Because the woman he had dismissed, the woman he had insulted, wasn't just powerful. She was the decision-maker, the authority, the one holding everything together. And suddenly, every moment from last night came rushing back. The spilled water, the tone, the words. People like you. His jaw tightened. Because now, those words didn't sound powerful. They sounded small. Clara watched him, quietly, not with anger, not with satisfaction, just awareness. Because she knew exactly what was happening in his mind. Recognition, regret, realization. But she didn't rescue him from it. She let him sit in it. One investor broke the silence again. This changes the structure of the deal entirely. Clara nodded. Yes, it does. Another asked, why wasn't this disclosed earlier? A slight pause. Then Clara answered, because I wanted to see how this room operates when it doesn't think I'm in control. That line hit hard, because now everyone understood. This wasn't just a negotiation. It was a test, and some had already failed. Victor didn't speak, because he already knew. He wasn't just part of the test. He was the main subject. Clara leaned forward slightly, her hands resting calmly on the table. And then, she did something unexpected. She softened her tone, not for weakness, but for clarity. I built everything I have from nothing. The room listened. Carefully now. No connections. No shortcuts. A small pause. Just work. Victor's eyes didn't leave her. Because suddenly, he remembered something. The way she moved in the restaurant. The way she handled pressure. The way she stayed calm under insult. That wasn't weakness. That was discipline. Clara continued. I've been in rooms where I wasn't respected. A beat. I've been underestimated. Another beat. I've been dismissed. Her eyes flicked to Victor, just for a second, then back to the room. And every time, her voice lowered slightly. I paid attention. That line carried weight. Because now, it explained everything. She wasn't reacting to last night. She was observing it, collecting it, understanding it. Victor exhaled slowly, almost silently, because the realization hit fully now. Last night wasn't just a random moment. It was the moment he revealed himself. And she saw everything. Clara leaned back again, calm, centered, in control. Then she said, "So now," a pause. "We can have an honest conversation. No more layers. No more assumptions. Just truth." And that was far more dangerous than anything before. Victor finally spoke, his voice steady, but different now, measured, careful. "You planned this." Clara tilted her head slightly. "No, a beat. You revealed yourself." That hit harder than anything else. Because it was true. No manipulation. No trap. Just observation. And consequence. The room sat in silence again. But this time, everyone understood exactly what was at stake. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about judgment, character, power, and one decision, from one night, had changed everything. The room didn't feel the same anymore. What started as a negotiation had turned into something far more dangerous. A shift had happened, and everyone knew it. Victor Hale sat still, but for the first time in years, he wasn't the one controlling the outcome. Across the table, Clara Reyes remained calm, unmoved, untouched by the pressure that was now spreading across the room like a slow fire. One of the investors leaned forward. "We need to reassess this entire deal." That was the first crack. Small, but fatal. Another voice followed. "If the financial exposure is as deep as presented." A pause. Then, "We're looking at significant risk." Victor stepped in immediately. "This is being exaggerated." His tone was firm, sharp, try to regain ground. But something was different. No one rushed to agree. No one backed him instantly. Because doubt, once introduced, doesn't leave easily. Clara didn't interrupt, didn't argue. She didn't need to, because the room was already doing the work for her. One of the senior investors turned to Victor. "Why were we fully informed about these structures?" Victor held eye contact. "Because they're standard within high-growth strategies." A weak answer, and he knew it. The investor didn't respond immediately. That silence was louder than rejection. Clara finally spoke. Not loudly, not aggressively, just enough. "Transparency isn't optional when trust is involved." Another shift, another hit. Victor felt it. Every word she spoke was landing exactly where it needed to. Not emotional, not dramatic, precise. And precision was far more dangerous. One investor leaned back, crossing his arms. "I don't like surprises." Another added, "I don't like hidden exposure." And just like that, momentum turned. Victor could feel it slipping. Deal structure, investor confidence, control, everything. He leaned forward again, voice tighter now. "We're still positioned for growth." Clara nodded slightly. "Yes." A pause. "But growth without stability." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to, because everyone in the room already knew how it ended. Collapse. The word wasn't spoken, but it was felt. Victor's chest tightened slightly, because this was no longer theoretical. This was happening. Right now, one of the investors closed his file slowly. "I think we need to pause this deal." That was it. The moment. The point of no return. Victor's eyes snapped toward him. "Pause." The investor held his gaze. "Yes." Another voice joined in. "I agree." Then another, and another. One by one, support disappeared. Not dramatically, not loudly, but steadily, like a structure quietly giving way under pressure. Victor sat back slowly, because now there was no pretending. The deal was collapsing, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Silence filled the room again. But this time, it wasn't tense. It was decided. Clara closed her file gently, not as a victory, not as a celebration, but as a conclusion. Then she stood, and as she did, the entire room subtly followed her energy. Attention shifted, focus aligned, power fully transferred. Victor watched her, because now he understood completely. This wasn't about revenge. This wasn't emotional. This was consequence. Pure, unavoidable. Clara looked at the investors. "We'll revisit this when there's clarity." Professional, final, controlled. Then, she turned to leave. But just before she reached the door, she stopped, and without turning fully, she spoke. "Mr. Hale." Victor didn't respond immediately, but his attention locked onto her, because something in her tone had changed. Not sharp, not cold, but real. You're not losing this deal because of numbers. A pause. Then, you're losing it because of judgment. The words landed heavier than anything before, because they weren't about business. They were about him. Victor didn't speak, because there was nothing to say. Clara finally turned slightly, just enough for him to see her expression. Calm, steady, certain. The way you see people. A pause. Is the same way your decisions are made. That was it. The truth. Simple, unavoidable, and devastating. She walked out. The door closed quietly behind her. And just like that, the most important deal of Victor Hale's career was gone. Not because of market conditions, not because of competition, but because of one moment, one assumption, one mistake. Victor sat alone in the silence that followed. And for the first time in a very long time, he wasn't thinking about strategy. He wasn't thinking about recovery. He wasn't thinking about control. He was thinking about her words and realizing this wasn't over, not even close. The boardroom was empty, but the silence remained. Victor Hale sat alone, still, unmoving. The chair across from him, where Clara had been sitting, now empty, but it didn't feel empty. It felt occupied by everything she had said. You're losing it because of judgment. The words replayed, over and over. Victor leaned forward slowly, hands clasped, eyes fixed on nothing. Because for the first time, there was no next move, no strategy, no counter, just consequence. And it was settling in,